Hello, I'm Daniel Benjamin, and I'm the president of the American Academy in Berlin, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Marcus Bierich lecture entitled Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America, with our guest, Alec MacGillis. This won't actually be a lecture so much as a book discussion. Alec joins us as the Marcus Bierich lecturer, and this program honors the legacy of one of Germany's great entrepreneurs and his many accomplishments. Marcus Bierich was the chief executive of Robert Bosch, and he had a number of other top jobs at Germany's industrial giants. He's a noteworthy figure, and I would say a good figure for the Academy in many ways, because he also held a doctorate in philosophy and had written his dissertation on Bertrand Russell. This lectureship was endowed by a number of people, including several from his family, and I believe that one of them may be watching, and so I want to say a particular welcome to her. A number of outstanding scholars have had this fellowship, or that have delivered this lecture in the past, and they include Francis Fukuyama, Adam Tooze, and Tricia Rose. So Alec, it's a pleasure to count you in this distinguished company. Let me now properly introduce our speaker. Alec is a journalist. He covers the politics and government section or beat for the nonprofit investigative journalism organization ProPublica. He has reported for the New Republic, the Washington Post, and the Baltimore Sun. His work has also appeared in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Harper's, and the New York Times Magazine. He has won a raft of different prizes, including the Robin Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting, the Scripps Howard Topic of the Year Award, the Polk Award for National Reporting, and the Elijah Parrish Lovejoy Award for Courageous Journalism on a wide range of policy issues. He is the author of The Cynic, a biography of Senator Mitch McConnell that came out in 2014. And of course, his most recent book is Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America. This book, which is a survey of the America that falls within the growing shadow of the internet behemoth Amazon, just came out in March. It's gotten wonderful reviews, including here in Germany, where it is published in German by Fischer Verlage under the title Ausgeliefert. I should add a note of full disclosure. I have known Alec MacGillis since he was younger than I think he cares to have disclosed, but let's just say it was before he went off to Yale. His father was my boss and one of my closest friends, and we worked together at the Berkshire Eagle newspaper in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Alec grew up. I am not the least bit worried about charges of favoritism. If you look at the book jacket of Fulfillment, you will see fairly outlandish praise from the likes of George Packer, Nick Lemon, Franklin Furr, and Larissa McFarquhar, who seem to agree, in Packer's words, that Alec MacGillis is one of the very best reporters in America. So relatedly, I should mention that we will soon be announcing our 2021-2022 class of American Academy Fellows. But I will give you a peek behind the curtain by saying that Alec will be one of our next Berlin Prize Fellows, and I'm really thrilled about that. He's particularly well suited for this semester in Berlin because he speaks perfect German, which he learned at home from his mother, who is a native of Germany. So Alec, we're thrilled to have you. And let me just remind our viewers that at any time they can enter a question into the Q&A function on their Zoom. Tempting as it may be, they shouldn't raise their hand or anything like that, because we will not see it, and we will not be calling on them directly, but rather I will be using the questions in that box, in that Q&A box, and I look forward to seeing that fill up soon. So Alec, this is really a remarkable book. I think it's fair to say it's a capacious book. It covers an enormous number of different themes. It covers, I think, maybe the best way to describe it is that it tries to get its arms around some of the biggest developments in contemporary America, galloping inequality, the painful struggles of the middle class, polarization, cultural resentment, the degradation of work, corruption of the democratic process. And it touches as well, of course, on race, the collapse of family structures and the like. And so the obvious first question is, what prompted you to take this on? What are the origins of this really remarkable book? Why don't you lay that out for us?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for having me at this event. It's quite an honor. I am like you. I'm thrilled that I'm going to get to be over there later this year, I guess. Really thrilled about it. I should say for the record that my German is not perfect. It's gotten quite rusty over the years, and one of the things I'm looking forward to is being able to bring it closer to perfection. This book is indeed capacious. It was so capacious that it was sometimes a challenge to get my arms around it, because I definitely had sort of very grand ambitions for it. This book started not as a book about Amazon. This book began years ago, really, with my growing concern about the disparities that I saw when I would travel around the country as a national political reporter for the Washington Post, starting back around 2008 when I was covering the Obama campaign, traveling all around the country with him, and then continuing to cover the country in the great years of the Great Recession, the early Obama years, and just being so struck by this disconnect between the struggles that I saw in cities and towns around the country, in the Midwest, in Appalachia, elsewhere, and then coming back to Washington, where I was based at the time, where Washington, D.C. was growing only more prosperous in those years of the Great Recession. So much of the spending that we were doing on stimulus in those years was kind of staying in Washington. And so you had this growing, galloping prosperity in D.C. And this real sense of disconnect from what was happening out around the country that drove me kind of crazy. And in some ways, probably also harkened back to my feeling of resentment, I guess you could even call it, about what was happening back in my hometown of Pittsfield, Mass, former GE town that was falling further and further behind the growing prosperity in Metro Boston, just 2.5 hours away. And so seeing these disparities growing between what I call winner-take-all cities and left-behind places, and a gap that is in fact quantifiably bigger than it has been in the past. We've always had richer and poorer places, but it's gotten bigger. Trump gets elected in 2016, partly because of these regional economic geographic dynamics. I decided that I really need to write about this now in book form. And it took me about a year to settle on the frame for the book. And I settled on Amazon eventually as the frame for two reasons. One is that the company is just so incredibly ubiquitous now in our country, permeates so much of our life, that it's just a handy metaphor for what we're becoming as a country, just an expression, a symptom of our society. But then more importantly, it's a good frame for the story because it is itself a driver of these regional disparities. It and the other tech giants are playing a big role in these growing gaps. Put simply, the concentration of wealth in certain places in this country is closely tied to the concentration of our economy in certain companies. And so that's how I came to Amazon as the frame. The book would not be about Amazon itself, but about the sort of America that falls within its shadow, and then everything sort of within that shadow, which did at times risk becoming almost too capacious for me to handle.
Yeah, so again, it is all there, and you have so many amazing characters and anecdotes and stories in here, and I'd really like the viewers to just get a sense of this. Perhaps you could give us a thumbnail of one or two of them. I have to say, if there were one chapter that I would pull out and publish independently, because I think it just covers so much, it would be the chapter entitled "Dignity," which is really about what happened to work in for lots of Americans, especially the rise and fall of industrial America. So can you just describe a little bit of that so our audience gets a sense of the book?
Sure. I mean, my goal with the book really was it was a reporter's book. It's a book where I'm just out there a whole lot talking to people. I am a reporter. I'm not an economist. I'm not a political scientist. I wanted to give people just a visceral sense of what life is like across this whole ecosystem. I really came to think of this as an entire ecosystem that stretches all the way from the top, from Bezos at the top, down to the warehouse workers and the cardboard box makers at the bottom. And just my goal was just kind of overwhelm you with the visceral details of these lives and what things are actually like at all these different levels. And the chapter you refer to is really, in a way, the spiritual core of the book. It's based in Baltimore, where I live, and it's about the transformation of this place called Sparrows Point that used to be the biggest steel mill in the world. Bethlehem Steel had 30,000 workers there in the late 50s, entire company town with a whole grid of streets and downtown, white downtown, black downtown, right there on by the mill, and an amazing sort of massive industrial skyline. Just it was hard to convey just how massive this thing was. And it has now been wiped clean off the face of the earth. It's eerie. You go there now, and your GPS in your car still calls out the names of the streets of the old town: B Street, C Street, D Street, E Street, but they're all gone. Just an empty, vast peninsula, and it's now been replaced by a logistics business park. Just all these warehouses, including 2 Amazon warehouses, and somewhat incredibly, I managed to find a man who had worked at the steel mill for more than 30 years. His name is Bill Bodani. Worked there for more than 30 years, whole succession of really grueling jobs, often quite dangerous jobs at the mill. But he took just extraordinary pride in that work, and was also making good money at it. Was making about $35 an hour at the end. Lots of camaraderie with his fellow workers, just a real sense of purpose and meaning in his work. Finally retired after yet another accident in his 60s, but then because his pension got slashed after the company went bankrupt, he felt like he had to go back to work, and he went back to work at an Amazon warehouse exactly on the same piece of land where he had been working at the steel mill, starting at $13 an hour, driving a forklift, just feeling just vastly less sense of purpose and camaraderie and meaning on the job, feeling just completely constantly under pressure from these young supervisors to deliver more and more pallets on his forklift, just in that sort of Amazon warehouse maw, completely on his own, not enough time to go to the bathroom. A common problem, as we know in these warehouses. Sometimes it got so, older guy had to go a lot. Sometimes it got so desperate that he would pull up his forklift in the corner and and sneak behind it. So utterly undignified. And he couldn't last more than a couple of years. He got in trouble for bringing some union literature in, and finally just kind of quit in anger. And so I tell his story, and another person, the story that I actually, in a sense, started the book with. The first chapter I wrote was about a young man in Dayton, Ohio, who makes cardboard boxes. And when I met him, he was living in a homeless shelter in Dayton with his family, despite the fact that he had a job making cardboard boxes for about $11 an hour. And I use his story to sort of tell the decline of the industrial Midwest, of how a city like Dayton, that was once really the Silicon Valley of its time, the Wright brothers, all these other great inventors and innovators, just tons of patents coming out of Dayton in the 1890s, extraordinary prosperity, and how that city has now evolved to the point where it is essentially now a logistics town. Its main concern is, because it's well situated on 2 interstates in the middle of the country, its main concern is packing and moving stuff that was made halfway around the world. A city that used to make so much in its own right. And at the bottom of that sort of ecosystem sits Todd Swallows Jr., making cardboard boxes after a whole string of low-wage jobs. His father had run a trucking company that moved actual auto parts that had been built in the Dayton area up and down the I-75 corridor. He went bankrupt in the Great Recession. His sons left to just go through a whole section of low-wage jobs, downward mobility, just, in all these different forms, substance abuse, domestic violence, just all the kind of stressors that have come with that kind of downward mobility. But a poignant figure, because he is so eager to support his family, to work hard. He's always worked hard. He's just desperately trying to provide for his family the way that his father had managed to provide for him.
Yeah, again, that's a great taste of all of the different kinds of people that you found and you spoke to. And, the book is, to my mind, invaluable, especially for those of us who honestly live on the well-to-do East Coast or West Coast, and really don't know the insides of what is too often disparagingly termed as Flyover America right now. So why don't you describe for us a little bit of the reporting and how much time you spent in Dayton and El Paso and Nelsonville and all these other places that very few of us have been to.
Sure. I mean, this was a 3-year project. And actually it's more than 3 years, because much of the reporting, my Dayton reporting, predated my having sort of proposed the book and gotten the book contract. So a lot of this was string that had gone back even further than that. But essentially it was a 3-year project, and I got a year's book leave to help with that. But although the book leave got somewhat cannibalized by articles that I felt like I had to do during the book leave, so it didn't really even amount to a full year. But just the whole. It was really the whole. All the tools in the kit, really. I mean, just lots of public information requests. I'm an investigative reporter, sort of by trade at ProPublica. So lots of public records requests that got me pretty incredible stuff from OSHA on workplace injuries and even fatalities in the warehouses. I ended up focusing on 2 fatalities at the exact same warehouse in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, that occurred over the span of just a few years there, just to give and with this incredible detail that I was able to get from those OSHA files on just not just how these deaths happen, but what life is really like inside the warehouses. Then also great stuff that I got from public records requests of emails between the company, between Amazon and local officials, and all their negotiations over the tax subsidies that they're just constantly demanding from localities when they're offering to go in, deigning to go in to build a warehouse or a data center. Then repeated trips to the places that I decided to focus the book. The book, I decided to focus in on essentially 4 places, 2 winter places, Seattle and DC. I picked DC as the other winter place even before Amazon picked it as its second headquarters, so that was very fortuitous. And then here in Baltimore, and then various places in Ohio. I'd spent a lot of time in Ohio as a reporter, so I already had a lot of contacts there, and I basically have used the story of Dayton as the story of the kind of decline of the industrial Midwest and what's happened there. And then I used Southeast Ohio, rural Appalachian Southeast Ohio, to tell the story of what's happened in rural America right now, that sort of decline. And then the sort of 5th place you mentioned is El Paso, and had a fascinating visit there, where I essentially chose El Paso to tell a story that could really have been told anywhere in the country of what Amazon is doing to small business. And there I focused on some office supply dealers in El Paso, essentially kind of the Dunder Mifflins of El Paso, companies that sell paper, printers, staplers, all the rest to local schools, governments, businesses, and are now under enormous pressure from Amazon. And in that case, was one of my, I think, more enjoyable kind of sleuthing moments as a reporter, where I was able to slip into a session that Amazon, closed door session, that's Amazon executives who had come to town were holding with a whole bunch of local businessmen, where they were giving them a fairly coercive pitch to come on board, join the Amazon marketplace, do all their selling through there, even though it was going to mean giving up a big cut to Amazon. And so being the fly in the wall for that session was pretty crucial. A lot of other moments like that where I managed to just slide into various Amazon lobby events, Amazon kind of confabs of various sorts, because I really wanted to give you not just what was happening at the sort of bottom of this whole new ecosystem, this whole universe of logistics, but also show you what was happening at the elite levels as well.
So first of all, to German viewers who aren't familiar, Dunder Mifflin is the office products company in the cult American TV show, The Office. I know it well. My son has watched every episode at least 6 times and can recite the entire script, and it's extraordinarily popular in the US. And it's really about the sort of the idiocy of office life. But talk a little bit more about how Amazon has put the squeeze on small businesses. I think, I'm not sure the marketplace is quite as, the Amazon marketplace is quite as fully developed in Germany, for example, as it is in the US. And it really does seem like the company is, working very effectively on both ends of the problem by both sitting on small producers, small businesses to sell through them, and sitting on the people who are going to make the orders for their goods.
Sure, this is now a big part of the company's success over here. It used to be that most of the sales on the Amazon website, if you went there as a consumer, were traditional retail, where Amazon is getting these goods wholesale and then selling them to us at whatever markup. And now, increasingly, the company's found that it's much more lucrative to have most of the sales on the site are now by third-party sellers, as they call them, which is basically a small business, or even a somewhat larger but medium-sized business, selling directly through Amazon to consumers. And the way it works is that Amazon, for the right to be on the website, on this marketplace where everyone now goes to find everything, these merchants have to give up a cut of their sales, and that cut ranges now roughly from 15 to 30%, and it gets higher. It gets higher because than the basic commission, because you often feel like to be seen on the site, to be seen on this vast site, to get your products noticed, you feel like you have to advertise. So you pay Amazon an advertising fee. Amazon is now, as a result, an increasingly huge player in digital advertising. We always think about Google and Facebook dominating that market and thereby sort of eviscerating traditional media, but Amazon is now rapidly growing as a third big player in the digital ad realm. So, but you're also paying Amazon for a fulfillment fee, which is essentially a fee to fulfill your order, to get it to the buyer. And then all sorts of other fees and commission that kind of add up, and often you can get close to 30%. And often those fees and commissions will, the amount, the rate will increase after you've joined as a seller, and then you feel like you have no choice to leave, because this is the only game in town. If you're not selling on Amazon, who's going to see you? You have no hope.
Right.
And the problem with this is not just that Amazon is making just tons of money off of this this kind of no option marketplace, no other option marketplace, but also that it is itself still competing against these sellers, even as it's getting such a big cut from them. It's competing against them both in its traditional sales, wholesale retail sales, but also now, more importantly, it's now often selling goods under its own labels, own private labels. They have all these different generic kind of names, pillows under this label, diapers under that label, and because it has all the data, it knows down to the T just exactly how much this or that product is selling, whether product is rising or falling, what even the details of the products that are doing well. It has increasingly started offering products of its own under its own private labels to replace the ones that I saw were doing well, and it can just knock out a third-party merchant's item in a heartbeat, and that's actually been at the crux of a lot of the scrutiny it's gotten. But it really, in a sense, if you think about what's developed with this third-party sellers in this marketplace, it's not unlike what happened back in the days of our previous generation of monopolies and quasi-monopolies, like a Standard Oil, where Rockefeller controlled the railroads, and he controlled the oil companies or his oil companies, his oil producers, and was thereby able to, through his control of the railroad, squeeze the rival oil producers who needed his railroads to get the product to market. So he controlled both the platform and was competing against people on the platform. Mm-hmm. And that's really quite similar to what has now emerged with the Amazon marketplace. So
I've been remiss. Can we get this with my electronic background? It doesn't look that way. This is quite, Alec, do you have a copy there?
Sure.
I don't know why it's not showing. Maybe if I won't look that. Okay, there's the book. So everyone should see it. And of course, the German edition looks completely different. So the issue that we were just talking about gives us sort of a springboard for jumping forward on this story. One of the people who blurbs your book is Lena Kahn, who is a law professor who has been nominated to become one of the commissioners of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And she wrote a pretty revolutionary law journal article, I believe, while she was still doing her law degree at Yale. And basically saying that our current approach towards antitrust is wholly unsuited for dealing with tech giants and Amazon in particular, and that we needed to look at this entirely anew. So I guess the question to you, Alec, is what do you foresee in terms of regulation? I mean, when I read the book, I was thinking a lot of some of your investigative journalist forebears like Upton Sinclair and the Muckrakers, and wondering how on earth is it that a company that has this dominant a role in the United States managed to escape antitrust enforcement? So where's it all going?
Yeah, I mean, the reason they've managed to escape it, as Lena described in that great article, is that we have just allowed our whole antitrust regime or enforcement of antitrust to wither and to atrophy over the years, and in a very specific way, which is that we have come to adopt an approach, a mindset, a standard that is essentially what's called the consumer welfare standard, the consumer welfare test, which is that as long as prices stay low, it doesn't really matter how big the giants get. That's all that matters, is that the consumer still gets low prices. The only time to worry about monopoly is if a beer company gets too much to the market and so starts driving up the price of beer or the equivalent. And so a company like Amazon could always just point to the fact that, look, we're selling all this stuff pretty cheap on the website. What's the problem? It's great for consumers, and they get great delivery and convenience. The consumer is thriving in this, in our sort of under our dominance. Similarly, Google and Facebook an even stronger case to make. They could say our stuff's free. What's wrong with that? Like you get to use this amazing social media site. You get to search, any information in the world, and it's all for free. And so, but now there are people like Lina Khan and many others who are making the argument that we need a whole new way of thinking about this. That there are distortions and all sorts of distortions and bad downstream effects that come from this kind of dominance, even if the stuff is cheap or even free. And the fact that she has now been nominated to the FTC is very striking. It's a very strong sign that there could be of the fact that there is now a renewed seriousness and sense of purpose around this in Washington. I mean, the best way to think about this is how much will the Biden administration be willing on this front to chart a different course than the Obama administration did. The Obama administration was famously lax on the tech giants. They metastasized hugely in the 8 years that he was in power, and we're seeing already that the Biden administration has decided to take a sharply different tack in some other areas, notably, big spending on social infrastructure needs and sort of deficits be damned and all that. And so will they also on this front decide to essentially kind of retroactively declare his beloved predecessor's approach as mistaken and take a much tougher tack? So you have Lina Khan being appointed. You have another very strong voice on antitrust, Tim Wu, being brought into the White House itself as an advisor. You have quite a lot of activity in Congress. I mean, Congress is so famously just asleep at the switch on so many things. But on this score, really, in the last couple of years, especially in the House, there's just been quite a lot of action and hearings and investigations and all that. Partly because Lina Khan was working there on staff. And so you've got actions now in Congress. Amy Klobuchar in the Senate is kind of taking the lead in the Senate. And then you have the possibility for real action in the agencies as well. There are all sorts of different ways one can go about this. And it'll be interesting to see what you can break off. You could break off Amazon Web Services, which is the hugely profitable cloud part of Amazon, which has, through its massive profitability and Amazon's dominance in that realm alone, is by far the leader in that realm. It has been able to, in a sense, it helps it to keep the prices low on the retail side because it's kind of making its profits over here on the cloud, and it can essentially kind of underprice on the retail side and continue to drive retail competitors out of business. So you could break that off. You could do something about the problem I just described with the platform. Somehow keeping Amazon from both being platform controller, platform owner, and competing against other sellers on the platform. Or maybe you decide that this is just not workable, that Amazon's become too dominant, that there's no way to do that cleanly. And then you start thinking about essentially coming to see Amazon or the others as a fact of life, approaching as a natural monopoly that approaches that we have to start approaching dealing with almost as a utility or as a railroad, and start thinking about common carrier kind of regulations where you're accepting their dominance, but then with their dominance comes just a whole new realm of regulations. But it's going to be fascinating to see this whole play out because in a sense it's a fight within the Democratic Party. It's a fight between the natural affinity, Silicon Valley affinity for the Democratic Party, all the people revolving door people who've gone from the Obama administration to Silicon Valley, all the money that comes from Silicon Valley to the Democrats, and also just the general broader Democratic mass consumer voter who is basically Amazon's strongest market is actually with sort of upper middle class, highly educated blue metro consumers. And so you have that affinity with the company at the same time as you have now more and more voices on the left who are trying to take it on. And so it'll be that intra-left debate is fascinating. And one last thing, one reason this might actually has a shot in Washington is that on the right, you do actually have plenty of people who want to take these guys on too, even if their motivations are different. There is actually some potential for consensus on taking on the giants in a way that there's not in any other realm.
Yeah, it's actually been striking in the hearings thus far on the tech giants, going back into the Trump administration, that neither political party is showing a lot of love for the big five, which are now such an enormous part of the American economy. I mean, it's really quite staggering. So one of the themes that runs through the book as well, as we start to talk about regulation, is just how effective this enormous corporation has been at preventing local governments from regulating it, from charging it really very basic fees, how they've been captive in terms of tax deals and all kinds of incentives to come to particular places, open up their their server fields and their fulfillment centers and things like that. Was this, you should describe that, but was this eye-opening for you? I mean, it seems, it even goes beyond, I think, what most Americans had suspected was going on.
Yeah, I think this was one of the most startling things I found, was just how, when I would get those emails between state and local officials and then in the company, to see just how desperate, just how obsequious the officials were in offering up all these huge subsidies, also offering up promises of secrecy. The company is just endlessly demanding secrecy, insisting on secrecy at all levels, and these emails where companies, local officials would just pledge to withhold as much as they possibly could, and almost apologize for, the laws will require us to give up, the final contract in the end, but we'll try to do no more than that. And one official in Southwest Ohio apologizing to the company, to Amazon, after a quote of hers appeared in a local story, something that she said, "I didn't speak to that reporter. Don't worry, don't kill me. I didn't speak to him. It was just something that slipped out of my mouth at a public meeting, but I will not talk to him again. Don't you worry." A moment that I witnessed firsthand was the opening of the first warehouse in Baltimore. It was at the site of a former General Motors plant in Baltimore before they opened the ones down at the steel mill. And there you had the mayor and a local congressman, both Democrats, on hand for a grand opening of that warehouse. And you saw them, this is after they had handed over $43 million in subsidies to the company for just this one warehouse. And they were praising the company, thanking the company for bringing these jobs to Baltimore, and then also thanking them as consumers for the great service that the company provided. The mayor said, "I love you, Amazon. You're the one who brings me my skin lotion on time." The congressman said, "I love you, Amazon. You delivered me my deodorant on time." It was just astonishing. I was there and I was just aghast to see like the consumer mindset, that consumer just infatuation and convenience hang up permeating even the elected official who's supposed to be sort of minding the till. It was just incredible. I mean, and what explains it, of course, in a lot of these communities, is that they are in fact so desperate for any jobs at all that they're willing to give away the store for 2,000 new warehouse jobs starting at 13, 14, 15 bucks an hour. And the company, of course, points to those jobs and says, "Look, we're delivering new jobs. This is a good thing. These places need them. We unlike Google and Facebook, actually are providing employment out around the country." What that overlooks, of course, is that those jobs are not strictly new jobs. There's a context here, which is that they are replacing a whole huge swath of brick and mortar retail jobs that have just been wiped out. And they are not only that, but they're in demanding those subsidies, they are undermining the local tax base, that's going to be even more pressed for services by the warehouse being there. The wear and tear on the roads, all the EMT calls that are going to come to the warehouse for various injuries. The company's not paying its fair share of those costs because of these huge subsidies. And finally, what's especially confounding about the subsidies is that the company, it's not as if the company can just go elsewhere if it doesn't get the millions that it wants from a given place. It needs to be in that place. It's now promising 1-2 day delivery. So it has to be everywhere. And it's not as if a local town or city said, no, we're not going to give you these millions, they can't just go to the next state over. They got to be there. And yet there's this feeling that you just got to do it. The part of the company that is devoted to getting these subsidies is called the Division of Economic Development, which is just one of the most sort of cynical Orwellian terms, corporate terms you can find.
Yeah. One of the questions you come away from the book with is, where do you win here? It just seems like municipalities are, getting the most minimal benefits out of the company's presence and just, literally paying through their teeth to hang on while their communities are being destroyed by the erosion of the tax base. And so it's just a fascinating question. I'm sure there are scholars who have worked on that, but it's a fascinating thing. So that question sort of leads to another one, and I'll ask this one, then we'll start turning to the cues that are piling up in the Q&A box. And this is a question that I think some of the reviewers have brought up in what I have to say is a sort of passel of incredibly positive reviews, but there's what do you say when someone says to you, hey, this is capitalism, creative destruction, enormous churn. The country is vastly wealthier than it was 50 years ago. And this is the price. Now, obviously, no one can blink at the inequality in the way that the goods are being distributed. But there is a lot of dislocation in our history, and not only in ours, but I think especially in American history, over the decades, and that American wealth has been built on an awful lot of displacement, at times immiseration. Our labor history is enormously painful. So how do you answer when people say, well, this is just the price of progress?
Well, I've had to address that question even before the book came out, because that was Amazon's main line back to me. And I spoke to them at length for the book, and their main defense was really interesting. It was interesting in its kind of depressingness. It was essentially, look, we know these jobs are tough. These jobs are not ideal. These jobs are really rudimentary and isolating. And we know this whole kind of warehouse realm that we've kind of moved into is, yeah, it's a little bit bleak. But if it wasn't us, it'd be someone else. This is all about larger structural forces. This is all about globalization and technology and the rise of e-commerce. And e-commerce was going to be inevitable once we had the internet, and it just so happens to be us who are in that role, and are sort of flourishing within it. And I think there's some truth to that, but I would say that one of the most important counters to that is that we all still have agency. Companies have agencies. Companies have agency. Jeff Bezos has agency. The company has made specific decisions over the years that I would say has exacerbated a lot of these problems. They've been especially aggressive in pursuing tax avoidance at all these different levels. Their demands within the warehouse are arguably more draconian than absolutely necessary. There's a reason why these great jobs that they're bringing to local communities, that people stay at them barely a year on average, because they're just so grueling and isolating. So unsustainable, really. And finally, another choice that they've made recently is that it was their choice to put their second headquarters in in Washington, D.C., which was already the wealthiest metro area in the country. And instead of putting it somewhere where that could have provided a real boost, it could have used a real boost, and that could have somehow in one fell swoop added some more balance to our economic geography. And that's what I would say is actually something that's different than what we've experienced in the past with dislocations in the past. We are, and this gets back to my original theme for the book, these regional disparities that we're experiencing now are simply bigger than what we've had before. Just the way that our income equality is now at a level that's essentially unprecedented, though maybe at moments in the Gilded Age we were there as well. 1% and everyone else, that gap is just extraordinary extreme right now. And similarly, what has happened with our regional gaps is not something we've dealt with before. To have one of the numbers I think tells it best is that as recently as in 1980, only small parts of the country had median income that was 20% below the average or lower. Just parts of the Deep South, parts of Appalachia fell that far below the norm. And then only small parts of the country fell 20% above the norm or higher. Now, entire swaths of the country are at those extremes. Like the entire Midwest is more than 20% below the norm, whole parts of the Great Plains. And then huge parts of the coasts are well above 20% above the norm. The wealthiest cities in the country in the 1960s included all these Midwestern cities: Cleveland, Milwaukee, Des Moines, Rockford, Illinois. Now they're almost all on the coast. So we've always had dislocations, we've always had ups and downs, but now we've ended up with these disparities, partly due to the way that the tech economy is working and how big we've let these giants become, that really are a new kind of thing, that are causing a new kind of damage in our life. And yes, we're a capitalist country, we're a capitalist society, but we've always used or needed regulation and some kind of when a winner company gets to a certain size, certain dominance. That is why through our beloved capitalist system, that is why we have bodies in place to try to mitigate that and to somehow kind of bring things back to scale. And the fact is that over the years we've stopped doing that. And that's what we're looking at right now. We're back to a 1910 moment with our new Standard Oils.
Right. So I do want to get to the viewers' questions, but it does beg the question: what's the response of Amazon been to your book?
It was radio silence for the first month, and then finally, out of nowhere, there was Jay Carney, the former journalist, former White House press spokesman, who's now the grand poobah of all Amazon influence, wrote a letter to the New York Times challenging their positive review of the book, and essentially, if I recall right, saying, "Wow, this is ridiculous. Everyone loves us. We added so many more jobs this past year," which is an odd thing, that pointing to exactly the growing dominance that the book is sort of meant to question, pointing to their growing size as somehow a defense against concerns about their size.
So here's an interesting question from a viewer. I'm perplexed that Amazon is at the center of this story. The deindustrialization of the US is not directly due to retailers like Amazon and Walmart, but to imports from China since 2000 and before that from Japan, Germany, and the Asian tigers. Retailers like Amazon and Walmart are at worst overbearing conveyor belts for these imports, but not their sources. And it's worth noting that in the film Nomadland, which did so well at the Oscars, Amazon is the best job that the protagonist, played by Frances McDormand, ever gets after her corporate job closes.
So I'll take the second one first. I wrote a whole op-ed actually for the LA Times critiquing the portrayal of Amazon in the movie. I thought it was a very good, powerful movie, but the portrayal of Amazon is notably benign, not just compared to what I found in my reporting, but compared to the book Nomadland that the movie was based on, which puts the company in a much darker light and has the workers who are working at Amazon, the actual real flesh and blood people that the book describes, really have a very hard time at the job and finding it just existentially bleak and also just incredibly wearing on their bodies.
Are you suggesting that there might be some Amazon kind of product placement involved in the movie?
Well, they got permission to film on Amazon.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
Okay.
But to the broader point, the book absolutely makes clear that this is not all about this one company having caused all these things. So when you go into, say, the chapter about Dayton, and it gets all into, I go deeply into the role that, especially that the WTO's admission of China played in the unraveling of industry in Dayton. The chapter on the steel industry in Baltimore goes deeply into just how things kind of fell apart for the American steel industry, and so again, the book does not lay everything at the feet of Amazon. Amazon is a frame and a thread, and is held responsible for certain specific things, but it does not attempt to lay it all of our woes at the feet of this one company. They are right now, I would say, the handiest thread and frame to sort of show where we're ending up with these disparities.
So one of the curious things about you and Amazon is that the newspaper where I think you spent the longest time, the Washington Post, is now owned by Jeff Bezos. It's not actually owned by Amazon, is it? It's
Right.
owned by Bezos.
Bezos.
And within your industry and my former industry, an awful lot of people would say, thank God he bought it. He's poured money into it. It's one of the very few newspapers in the country that has actually been hiring at a pretty impressive clip. Mm-hmm. The paper also benefited from the Trump administration because there were so many stories that you had an honest to God newspaper war going on with the New York Times, and to some extent the Journal as well. So it was, exciting times. But how do you feel about Bezos owning the Post, and what have you heard from your many friends and former colleagues inside the Post?
I'm happy for the paper that they have had the resources pumped into them. The paper has, no question, gotten stronger in these recent years, but there is a fundamental awkwardness that has come with his ownership of the paper. The paper covers Amazon quite well. They've got a reporter in Seattle who does a great job. They occasionally, take some shots at this or that aspect of the company, and everyone tells me that never is Bezos picking up the phone and saying, write this or don't write this. But what that misses is that there's a fundamental problem, awkwardness, around one particular story, which is Amazon's takeover of Washington, D.C. Amazon's presence in D.C. has just grown enormously between the purchase of the paper, between his purchase of Bezos' purchase of the biggest mansion in town, where he's turned it into kind of a VIP salon. Huge increase in lobbying spending, tons of contracts the company's getting from the government for the cloud services, and then finally now picking Washington, D.C. for his second headquarters, 25,000 high-paying jobs, billions in investment, whole new corporate campus. It is taking over the city in the way that no other private sector company has done, and that story needs to be told, because there's a reason why they're doing this, of course. But they know that their biggest threat right now is not from other companies, but from the threat of federal intervention. So it's no mystery why they chose Washington as their second headquarters. And the story of that massively rising profile and influence in Washington is not being told fully by the newspaper that is owned by Jeff Bezos. It's just not. And I tried to tell that story in the book, partly for that reason, to correct for that. It's just a deep existential kind of challenge that they're facing right now in telling that story.
So if I were to analyze their strategy, I would say it's flawed if they think by being in Washington, they will influence Washington. If you look at how the defense industry managed to get a pretty good lock on Congress, it was by putting production plants in every congressional district and ensuring that congressmen knew what was keeping their districts economically afloat. Is Amazon doing that as well, or have they really put all their eggs in this Washington strategy that you have described?
Well, they can also they do both. Because they can point to the warehouses that are now in so many districts. They've grown 50. They've added 50% more warehouse space just in the past year. That's how much stuff we were ordering from them. Sales went up 45%. They had to hire 400,000 more people in America and expand their warehouses by 50% just in 1 year. And so they can point to that. But they also know that by being in Washington, it's a form of soft power, right? I mean, now Amazon is no longer that big scary tech company from Seattle. They are also the company that employs that nice guy who you chat with at your daughter's soccer game. And there's absolutely that kind of benefit to it. And it's worth noting also that a lot of those big defense companies have, in fact, in recent years moved to Washington and Northern Virginia. They're also there now. They moved from California and elsewhere. And so there's just no question that this is now part of their strategy, just to be, this sort of big, friendly local employer who can't be all that bad because you see them down the street.
Mm-hmm. So one of our audience applauds your reporting in the spirit of Upton Sinclair and the Muckrakers. And I guess the question is, this reminds this individual of the early 20th century, and the cycle of rise and fall is endemic to Western culture, as is the social upheaval it produces. Question is, what happens next? Jeff Bezos himself has suggested that Amazon will be replaced by a new sort of marketeer or marketer, I guess. Big data and even faster computing speeds, which are racing ahead. So the first phase of globalization ended with World War I. Are things already out of control and hurtling towards another crack up?
Boy, I'm wary of making predictions, but I would say so much depends now on this fight in Washington over whether we're going to do anything about this at this point, the way we did 100 years ago. Because failing that, there's no reason that they can't just get bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, there's still plenty more of retail to shift to online. There's still plenty more other realms of the economy for them to try to get into. And the company's whole mind driving philosophy is one of constant growth. It's just Bezos has a real fear of stasis, and you've said this, that he believes that stasis, status quo, leads inevitably to decline. That you have to be the shark, always moving. But then as far as the social, the social political implications, I'm very worried about the divides, and the divides have not been caused only by these companies, but they played a huge role in it. And I've really come to see my job as a reporter as partly trying to transcend the divides and move between the different realms and try to at least create some kind of bonds of understanding. And that was a big goal for me with this book, actually, was to help people, especially people sort of in the blue bubble, better understand what was happening out there, to think a little bit more about what lay behind that one click. And because that one click, especially after this year where that one click became even more prevalent, even more dominant, we embraced that one click like such alacrity this past year. And I do actually believe that there is still some room for agency, personal agency in this regard. I don't advocate a boycott. I'm not, any kind of cold turkey, but I do believe that I hope that the book is a spur for people to re-engage with the world around us, the communities around us, and the physical spaces around us, to get out behind the screen in the one click, and just to because otherwise they're going to wither, and so are the communities are going to wither, and so are the bonds, and I do fear what a world looks like where we are utterly atomized, where it's just us buying our stuff, our crap, and then the person in the warehouse packing it, and who knows, maybe they won't even have to drive it to us. The drone will bring it, so we won't even see the warehouse driver. We won't even have the choice of whether to wave to him or not.
One of the questions that the book sparked for me was, what you thought had influenced you most in terms of the works of others. When I read the book, I felt like we'd both been reading lots of Robert Putnam, perhaps Studs Terkel's great book, Work, which came out in the 70s. I could imagine The Road to Wigan Pier by Orwell. But why don't you tell me what the things are that have really shaped your thinking about the phenomenon you're reporting on?
Sure. And several of those books have definitely, that you just mentioned, have been cited by reviewers as things they saw traces of. For me, though, I would say, sort of chronologically, Ida Tarbell's book on the Standard Oil Company definitely just got me thinking about that precursor in antitrust terms, and Sinclair for sure. My initial epigram for the book was from the jungle, and I sort of saw the book as the book lays out kind of the antitrust problem and the worker condition problem. So Tarbell was my precursor for the one, and Sinclair for the warehouses. Then as far as more recently, I would say definitely George Packer's The Unwinding was a model just for that basic approach of digging into certain people's lives in different parts of the country, just going really, really deep in reporting on lives and places. And then also I'd say Evicted, Matthew Desmond's book on
also on my list of things I saw in there. Yeah, no, a masterpiece, a great book. Yeah. So one thing that has really interested Europeans, in my experience about Amazon, was its struggle, the way that how effective it's been fighting off unionization, and the recent vote in Alabama not to unionize at a particular, I guess, was it a fulfillment center? Was fascinating to Germans in particular. First of all, how do you explain this kind of just existential struggle to keep the workers from unionizing, and yet they seem to do okay with unionized workforces in Europe?
Right, they do, and it's such a crucial difference actually between the warehouses in much of Europe and over here, which was came up again recently during the pandemic when the unions in Europe, especially in France, managed to actually very quickly demand and institute safety measures, so even basic things like letting workers get paid for the time they were having to spend going through the sort of safety check-ins before and after the shifts, making the transitions at shift ends more gradual, so that there was less crowding, all that kind of thing. That was all thanks to the unions and over there. The stakes are so huge with unionization. I mean, I think of it in historical terms. That steel mill in Baltimore that work was not unionized until the 1940s. And in the first decades of the century, it was incredibly low paid. It was very dangerous, incredibly high demands, plutocratic owners, no say on the job, just crazy hours, all that. But they managed to lift that work through unionization, which finally voted on in 1941 during the war, managed to get way better pay, better benefits, much more of a feeling of say and sort of worth on the job. And those jobs became jobs that were sustainable, that people spent decades at, and that you could raise a family on. And the big question now really is, now that the warehouse work has become the new mass employment option in our country, and it's only going to get more so as these grow. It's the second biggest job after Walmart, employer after Walmart. It's where a lot of workers now just go. If you have no college degree, you have no special training, you just need a job. And for some time period, you go to the Amazon warehouse. And we're kind of back to square one with all, they're not paid enough, plutocratic owners, crazy demands on the job, no say, all that. Can we lift this work up to something that's more sustainable, more kind of middle class, more family supporting? Depends on whether we can, in large part, on whether we can go through a new cycle of organizing. But it's going to be really tough. The reason that the vote lost in Alabama is manifold, but the biggest reasons are, I'd say, the laws make it so hard. The laws in the book since the 1950s make it incredibly hard to do new organizing. Attempts to reform those laws have constantly run into the filibuster. But then secondly, there is the problem also of expectations, that so many workers now have just come to sort of accept such lower expectations for pay, not just pay, but also just hopes of any kind of anything sustainable, that right now the Amazon job is just something you're just doing for now. You're just coming to do it for a year or two. You're 23 years old, 27 years old. You're not planning on staying here. Hey, it's $15 an hour. That's better than the fast food. I don't know anyone who's in a union. I don't know what that could even get me. And so that's one thing that the organizers are up against, this kind of a mindset where it's just, where you have been you're willing to accept the company's line that's essentially, look, this is better than anything else for now. So what's the problem? But the fight is going to continue, and I think that even with the loss, it did help to sort of stir ferment around the country. And I think it's too soon to say that it was an outright loss and not a moral victory of some kind.
And how much of the loss do you attribute to Amazon's frankly brilliant move of guaranteeing $15 an hour?
I'm not sure too much to that move itself, because that's been a couple of years now that they raised the rate to that back in 2018, before this particular warehouse had even opened, and I think that there's still quite a lot of upset, a lot of the warehouses, about that rate not being enough, because they work so damn hard, and they see Bezos making $58 billion more in a single year. They see their sales just going through the roof, and they have actually not gotten a bump up from that $15 rate since 2018, since before the surge in sales. They got a $2 surcharge, supplement early in the pandemic, kind of a hazard pay kind of thing. But the company took that away just 2 months into the pandemic, and so they know that the company could pay so much more. I would say that and they also know that it's that $15, yes, is better than minimum wage, it's better than fast food, but they also know that it's not as good as you can get at some other warehouses. That fact, how I've come to think of the wage is that we have the work has replaced, Amazon warehouse work has replaced retail brick and mortar jobs, but it's more physically taxing and isolating than that work was. It's more like assembly line work, but it's not paid nearly as well as assembly line work. And so there's absolutely still room to push to grow that wage. The more important thing, I think, is that the company is just very effective at the rest of the game. They're so effective at all the anti-union tactics, all the captive meetings that they have workers go through, all the messaging. They're very, very good at it. This is for them, this is existential. They absolutely do not want the warehouses to go union, and so they pull out all the stops, and they even changed the stoplight. I love this. They changed the stoplight at the warehouse in Alabama so that the organizers on the outside didn't have time to talk to workers as they were leaving. So there was no red light essentially.
So I want to just ask you. You said that the warehouse job is the job certainly of the president, but also of the future. And one of the interesting things in your book is how they are continually increasing the level of automation in the warehouses. And I'm wondering if we aren't going to see significant job losses over time.
We keep waiting for that, right? That's the big question. Like, but meanwhile, they keep hiring hundreds of thousands more people. And the reason for that is that while they have greatly automated the warehouses, there are certain things that they just can't teach the robots to do yet. And in a way, it comes down to just the problem of teaching robots to grab things. Robots have a hard time grabbing things in different shapes and sizes, and knowing how to do that. And so, this sounds really depressing, but the workers, in a sense, workers are still in these warehouses simply for their ability to grab something off a shelf. And what's made the work in the warehouses even more bleak in a sense in recent years is that with the growth of automation, you'd think that would make the whole promise of automation is that it leaves us to do higher order things. But in effect, it has actually made the warehouse work itself more robotic. The job of the picker used to be, that's the main job in a warehouse, going to find the stuff, used to be walking up and down the aisles looking for things. And it was a really hard job as you walked a ton. Sometimes you got shocked by the metal shelving when you reached out to it. But now in most warehouses, the robots, these amazing robots, bring the stuff to you. They have stacks, towers of shelves on them, and they zoom around, all these things, they zoom around, they don't crash into each other somehow, and they bring it to you. The picker stands there in the same spot all day, and they're just picking stuff out, and then they put it in the box, in the tote, and they send it on down. And so that work has become, in a way, even more basically rote in that sense. And in a way, your work is being driven by the robots. I mean, you're almost kind of working at their behest now. They are your boss because you need to keep up with them. They're bringing you all the stuff, and you better pick the one thing because the other guy's right behind them with the next thing. It's kind of dystopian, but it still actually requires a lot of people because the one thing they can't do is they can't grab.
Of course, a lot will depend on what happens post-pandemic in terms of people's buying habits and whether they're eager to go back into stores. But it will be really an interesting thing to watch in the same way that we're going to watch whether the automation of the car, leads to lots of job losses among drivers of trucks, taxis, and the like. So, I'll come clean. I, for many years, have loved one thing about Amazon, and that is that, and this is a terrible confession, and I'm hugely embarrassed to say it, but the ability to shop for books on Amazon is unparalleled, and it's even easier than going into a great university library and finding the one book you need for a research project. So I'm coming clean on that, and now I'm going to have to think about ordering more from independent bookstores, and I do mourn the loss of all the big chains that and the independent bookstores that are gone. But this is a long way of winding up and saying, so what are your Amazon habits like? I'm sure you get asked this in every talk.
Yeah. Mine are that for some time now, even before I took on this book, I've just really, really tried to limit it, to basically a last resort kind of thing. If I really can't find a used book somewhere else, through my local store or Powell's or whatever, I'll order from them. And I think the last non-book thing I ever ordered from them was a latch for my tailgate latch for my pickup truck, and I just I was kind of lazy in that moment, and I ordered it from them. But in general, I've just tried to really limit it, and and again, I've managed to make do fine, and that's the thing. Like, it's not that hard, and 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 I I really do. I've been urging people, again, not to go completely cold turkey, but certainly to moderate. And because what happened this past year was not moderate, it was hugely excessive, arguably even in excess of the public health sort of demands, and just to re-engage with the world around us, not just in our shopping, but in all aspects of our life, and to go back to the movies, go back to the theater, not just be on the screen, and just to get back into our world, in the physical world. And so, and I have to be very careful not to sound too kind of moralizing about it or whatever, but I do think that we do all still have agency in this. Tim Wu puts it so well. I mean, a couple of years ago, he pointed out that yes, Amazon seems more convenient than going 5 miles or 5 blocks to buy the hammer over there at the hardware store, but it's going to certainly be more convenient after that hardware store goes out of business, and then you got to go 20 miles or 20 blocks. It's a pretty vicious cycle, and it's not hard to see how that's going to happen.
Yes. Okay, I'm duly chastened. But that's why I asked the question. So, Alec, this has been a fabulous conversation. We're going to have a great time in the fall. There'll be a lot more to talk about, but I really want to thank you for doing this now. And we look forward to hearing more about the projects ahead, your progress at German, and all kinds of other things. So again, thanks for joining us here for this event, and we look forward to being in touch.
Great. All right, thanks so much, Dan. Really enjoyed it.
Hope you, excuse me one more time. Hope you sell a million.
There it is.
There you go.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks,
All
again.
right. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Goodbye, all.